Hello, everyone. Let's talk about Lyme disease. This is not a film that I wanted to make. This is a film that I was asked to make by a variety of people from all over the world. I have done this recording twice over the past couple of weeks and then turned around and threw it out both times. I'm going to commit to this one regardless of how bad it is. This is a very tricky story to tell. It's incredibly complex. I've got 13 points in front of me that I need to get through. I hope this helps. The number one thing you can take away is if you have Lyme disease or you have a chronic illness, I am a living testimony to the fact that you can come out of this if you are diligent, fortunate, focused, and adamant about getting better. You can do it, because I was never healthy my entire life. I had double bronchial pneumonia at 6 months old. I had severe asthma as a kid. I've had Epstein-Barr, mono, meningitis, parasites. I've been ill on and off for my entire life. Nothing prepared me for how bad Lyme disease was. It is and was the worst thing I've ever had. There were times where I wasn't really sure what the outcome was going to be. I was in doubt. I was critically ill for 2.5 years. I was half ill, I would say 50% ill for another 2.5 years. And now I would say I'm between 5 and 15%, 5 on a normal day of illness, 5% illness, and 15, I'll have a little spike every now and then. The tricky part is determining what causes the spikes, and I have yet to be able to do that. I'm 6 years into my illness, and I still, for the life of me, at times can't figure out what triggers small relapses. Now, luckily, I'm not relapsing to the point I was several years ago, but it has been a long, uphill, challenging battle that required 100% of my abilities to get beyond it. I have a lot of people to thank. My wife was in the middle of it with me the entire time. I can't imagine how frustrating it was for her. She's been very helpful from the beginning, and it sucks for anyone who's around you when you're going through this process, because you're sick makes them sick in the sense that they have to live the life that you're living. It's incredibly unfair to the other person or people, but it's the necessary evil of what happens when you have a chronic disease. I also have to thank my employer, Blurb, because I got Lyme disease while I was employed at Blurb, and they bent over backwards to make sure that I was not forced into a situation that would make it worse. They came to me and said, look, if you're ever at the point where you're having an issue, just say something. There were exactly 2 moments during my career at Blurb where the Lyme was so bad that I knew that I was in big trouble. The first instance, and the only one that I'll describe, is I flew to London to do an event. I felt amazing all the way over there. I got to the hotel and it hit me, and I thought, I'm in big trouble. I'm not sure I can even function. And I was sitting in the lobby of the hotel. My boss at the time walked in the door, and from 50 feet away, she froze in her tracks, looked at me, kind of tilted her head, walked over to me and said, you no longer have any responsibilities on this trip. Go to your room, have some good food, go to sleep, and when you're okay, you can come out of this. If you're able to work, great, and if not, it's not a big deal. You can fly back. Whatever. So I was incredibly fortunate. Not everybody's in that scenario. And there were times, like I just mentioned, where it was all I could do to keep it together. Point number 1, Lyme disease as experiences go, is as unique as your fingerprint. I've talked to so many people over the last 6 years from all over the world, and Lyme is a global problem now. Do not listen to anyone who tells you otherwise. There is so much misinformation and so much scandal surrounding this disease, cover-ups, misinformation, the government's purposely leading the public in the wrong direction, and I will explain some of this. It sounds crazy, but it's not. I went through it personally. Lyme is incredibly unique. I've talked to people who got a tick bite, saw the bullseye rash, got on medication the same day, and were able to basically get beyond it rather quickly. Other people in the same scenario who became debilitated and have never gotten over it, and a ton of people in the middle, which is where I would put myself. Lyme has about 150 symptoms. It's called the Great Mimic. It mimics basically as many diseases as you could possibly imagine. That is why it is so commonly misdiagnosed. Point number 2, and I think I just mentioned this a minute ago, it's impossible for anyone around you to fully comprehend how bad it is. It's when you're the person in the middle of the chronic disease, you have to realize that you are on an island. Nobody around you can fully comprehend how bad it is. That's okay. You have to share as much content and as much data as you can along the way to help inform them, because when you're healthy and the person around you is not, especially year after year after year, it becomes very easy to overlook the situation that you're in. You want them to be healthy, and they're not. You want them to be the person they were before, and they're not. And so I get it. One of the worst things that you can tell a Lyme patient is you don't look sick. So Lyme is not like you took an arrow through your neck, right? Like you were out at the archery range and a stray arrow went through your neck, and you come home and you're like, wow, you got an arrow through your neck. You're probably in pain. Lyme, you look relatively normal. And so people go, oh, you can't be that sick. You couldn't find something further from the truth. And it can be really frustrating. So just be careful about that. All right. So let me give you a little story here. 2014, I was in Western Australia on a several thousand-mile road trip / camping trip with two friends of mine. I went from there to Southern California, from Southern California to New Mexico, and from New Mexico to New England. All of these locations have ticks and have Lyme. Regardless of what anyone says, that is the truth. So when people hear that story, they say immediately, oh, you got it in New England, right? Because New England in the United States is the global epicenter for Lyme. That is where it originated. It originated about basically Lyme, Connecticut is where it originated. But the last point that I'm going to talk about today is how and why that is the case. But anyway, New England is terrible for Lyme. It is incredibly rampant. The CDC lies every year about how many new cases there are in America. I don't think they want people to understand how pervasive and how widespread this is. You can get it anywhere in the United States. Western Australia, there were ticks everywhere. New Mexico, here we have ticks. Southern California is bad. It's not as bad as NoCal, but it's pretty bad. New England is the logical place that I would have gotten it. The problem with that story is that to get it in New England, I would have had to have been bitten on the morning of the first day. And based on where we were, that is very unlikely because I started showing symptoms the first day in New England. And this is where it gets a little rocky. So I don't remember having a tick bite. I never saw a recognizable tick bite. And I don't know if I had a tick bite. I don't know where and when I got it. The first symptoms that I began to suffer is I lost my vision. I suddenly could not keep anything in focus at any distance. And my wife had to drive. I could not drive. I tried every pair of glasses I had. I had no idea what was happening. And at the same time, I started to develop really awful cognitive issues, a fogginess that was so overwhelming. I felt a half second behind everything. I just couldn't keep up. I was dopey, foggy, and then the fatigue hit. Now, as I mentioned before, I've had Epstein-Barr, mono, meningitis. I've had some pretty serious bouts with fatigue in my life. Nothing came close to Lyme. It was debilitating at a level that is hard to comprehend. I am a guy with a plan all the time. I have a million things on my plate. I have a million things I want to accomplish. And for me to go from 90 miles an hour to 0 and start sleeping 20 hours a day was not normal. And so a lot of physicians that I've talked to over the years, especially those in bed with pharma and those in bed with insurance companies, they say chronic Lyme isn't real. Yes, you can have a tick bite. Yes, you can get Lyme disease, but you take one antibiotic for 2 weeks and it miraculously goes away and you're totally fine. And anything after that is psychosomatic. That, oh, there's no such thing as chronic Lyme. All of those people are lying, and they're lying for financial reasons primarily. Chronic Lyme, for those of you who know me that are watching this from around the world, you know the kind of person I am. You know the agenda I have. You know the accomplishments I want to achieve. For me to sit around and claim that chronic Lyme is some mystical thing that I'm making up was so insulting and lit a fire under my ass to go out and prove to these idiots that there was something as chronic Lyme, because I've been suffering from it for 5.5 years. So I fly back from New England, we go back to California, and I don't know what I have. All I know is I am not right, and it's majorly wrong. So I am sleeping 20 hours a day. I keep thinking I can fight through it. I'm on a bike ride 5 miles from my house with other people, and I come to on the bike, and I don't know where I am. I don't know how I got there, and I don't know who I am. And that was when I said, I'm in deep shit. This is a major problem. So I go to my doctor. My doctor's a friend, not a Lyme specialist. Southern California, very hard to find people that are Lyme literate. He says, you're exhausted. You've got chronic fatigue. I said, I don't think so. You know, I had a full agenda before this. I was fine. Something's wrong. He tests me for Lyme. And there was a basic blood culture for Lyme. At the time, I didn't know that that was not a way to test for Lyme. I saw the little box on the form. I thought, oh, and then of course the results come back negative. Can't really test for Lyme with a basic blood culture. It's going to come back negative all the time. They do that so that insurance companies say, look, we don't have to talk about it. Pharma, we don't have to talk about it. You don't have Lyme. So I test negative, and I'm very relieved because I know how bad Lyme is. I start looking on the computer like an idiot as to what the symptoms are going to point to, and it's every horrible disease you can possibly imagine. So now I'm thinking, all right, I'm dead. 2 weeks from now, I'm totally dead. So I just keep going, doctor after doctor. I end up at a neurologist who does every scan imaginable, every test imaginable. He says, I know what you have. You have trigeminal neuralgia. I said, great, you did the test for that. Let me see it. He goes, okay, wait. You don't have trigeminal neuralgia. You have polyneuropathy. I go, really, nerve damage? I was 44 at the time. I go, is that common in 44-year-olds? He goes, no, we've actually never seen it in a 44-year-old. I go, well, you did the test. Let me see it. Okay, whoa, you don't have that. You have restless leg syndrome. So he proceeds in a 10-minute span to misdiagnose me with 5 diseases back to back to back to back to back. I said, I'm starting to think I have Lyme disease. He stands up, put his hands in the air, and says, I will not talk to you about Lyme. It would be better if you left my office. At that moment, I knew I was in a whole new ball game. I knew that Lyme disease was falling into a category of unpopularity in the medical community, especially in a place like Southern California, where doctors say you can't get it in Southern California, you can't get it in Northern California. They are lying and they are ignorant because you can and people are, and you do get it in these places. So I had to go to plan B. And what I discovered was, thankfully, I have friends around the world who have Lyme, who have family members that have Lyme, that said to me, look, you're on an island, you're in trouble, you've got to look for what's called an LLMD, a Lyme literate medical doctor. They are the only ones who are going to be able to process this and not treat you like you're making it up, and they're going to really have a protocol for you. I forgot to mention someone to thank. There is a photographer on the East Coast who is the person who diagnosed me with Lyme 3,000 miles away, who said to my wife, how's Milner? Oh, he's sick. He's got this weird thing. What are the symptoms? She told him. He said immediately he's got Lyme disease. He has to get treatment immediately, get on protocol. I have him to thank too. He will remain nameless, but I have him to thank. So I go to an LLMD down in San Diego. He's booked for 8 months. I call him. I said, I can't wait 8 months. I've been sick for 3 months. This is getting bad. The longer you go without getting treatment, the worse it is. He said, I'm sorry, don't come down here. I said, I'm driving down tomorrow morning and I'm sitting in your office until you have a cancellation. He started yelling at me on the phone. I said, I don't care, I'm coming. He was like, fine. So I drove down. He finally saw me, spent 2 hours with me on the first meeting, just asking me questions, gave me a Western blot test. I tested positive for Lyme, both CDC and through IGeneX and NoCal, which is the lab up there that does the Western blot test. There are, since that time, there are better tests available now. I knew what I had. I had Lyme. I got on a protocol. And here's where things get crazy. And let me get through this. Let me get down to the treatment here. Okay, next step of this. I skipped like 8 steps, but cut me a break here. I'm riffing on this whole story in one take. Treatment. So now I'm at the LLMD. I now know that I have Lyme disease. I don't know that I have co-infections. When you typically get a tick bite, you rarely just get Lyme disease. You often get co-infections along with it, Babesia, Bartonella, etc., things like that. You've got to address the co-infections often before you can address the Lyme. I don't know any of this. I'm like, I need protocol, I need meds. I was given a protocol, drug treatment. I want you to listen to this very carefully. I took 3 antibiotics twice a day for 2 years straight. Let me repeat that. I took 3 antibiotics twice a day for 2 years. Do you have any idea what that does to your body? So long-term multiple antibiotic treatment is one of the protocols for Lyme. I would not do that again. I think that there are better versions of that. IV, PICC line, antibiotics, pulsed on and off, I think is a smarter plan. I am not a doctor. Do not take me for medical advice. I will tell you the protocols that I did. I will give you suggestions of what I would do again, but I am obviously not a medical professional. You've got to talk to your LLMD. You've got to talk to your doctor who's versed in these things. Protocols for Lyme are changing all the time. Do not necessarily do what I'm doing. I'm sharing what I did. I did meds for 2 years. I did 40 days of hyperbaric oxygen treatment at Lyme depth, and let me tell you, that ain't no joke. You go into a hyperbaric oxygen chamber. I am not claustrophobic. It was the most claustrophobic, horrible experience you can possibly imagine. I would get in there with my laptop, and this tube with a little portal was the only source to the outside world. They have to take you to Lyme depth. It takes like 2.5 hours. I did that every day for 40 days in a row. I would be sitting in there on my laptop, and my body would just burst out sweating so quickly. Sweat would be dripping off my arms onto my keyboard. I started to freak out inside this tube. It was horrible. I did that 40 days in a row. I did IVs. I changed my diet. I changed my sleep habits. I did every single thing I could possibly do. I attacked Lyme disease like it was attacking me. No joke. The first thing I did was change my diet. No sugar, no dairy, no gluten, no corn, no alcohol. I was hardcore. I got emaciated. People would come in our house and I would see the look on their face of like panic when they saw me. I heard that some friends were talking about it. They thought I was dying. Someone came over and said, "Are you wearing black eyeliner?" Because I looked so horrible. I didn't care. I was trying to kill the Lyme bacteria. I would have done anything at that point. So again, 2.5 years of acute sickness, 2.5 years of partial sickness before I started to slowly come out of this. I went through 4 LLMDs, Lyme literate medical doctors. They seemed to get progressively better the more I went along. The last Lyme LLMD I went to, I really liked. I do not like the people who are in his office. I don't like the people between me and him. They're not friendly, so I'm not going to recommend him. But he was a Lyme detective, basically. He said, look, I'm going to back up. He diagnosed my co-infections. He got me on the last protocol that got me over the hump and started to allow me to come out of this whole thing. All right, let's see here. Suggestions. Do not get bitten by a tick. Number 1. That would be my first suggestion. Don't get Lyme disease. But ticks are prevalent. The winters are not killing them off like they used to. They are all over the place. You can get Lyme anywhere. I literally was talking to somebody from Finland last week, and apparently ticks are really bad there. Talking to somebody in Mexico, they're very bad. Someone wrote me from Australia and said the beaches north of Sydney are really bad. It's everywhere. So you have to be careful. I have friends in Germany in the 80s that got the Lyme vaccine in Germany because Lyme was coming over the Alps. They were getting it. A friend in southern New Mexico left New York because all of her friends were getting Lyme. Everybody seems to have an interconnected Lyme story. If you are bitten, save the tick. You can get the tick tested and see what infections it has. Tick-borne illnesses, I think there's 50 vector-borne tick-borne illnesses now. They can carry all kinds of things: Powassan, Rocky Mountain spotted fever, Lyme disease, Babesia, Bartonella. There's a million bad things that they have. Stay positive. If this is a long road, the sooner that you get diagnosed, the better off you're going to be. If you see a tick, if you get a tick bite, you have what's called a bullseye rash around the outside of it. Even the most jaded doctor, typically in various parts of a country, whether you're East Coast, West Coast, South, North, they see a bullseye rash. You can often get diagnosed and get treatment for Lyme. The quicker that you get treatment, the better you are. Again, protocols are changing all the time because this is such a pervasive disease now. I think it's the fastest vector-borne disease in the world. There is a lot of misinformation about this. It pains me to hear the US government talk about Lyme and the fallacy of the absolute misinformation that they propagate every year in regards to how many new cases there are, how many people that are sick. I'll give you an example. The first LLMD I was at in San Diego, as I was sitting in his office with no appointment, waiting hour after hour after hour, a woman comes in with a young boy. He was positive for Lyme. She said, we lived in a gated community in New Jersey with 165 houses, and every house had a Lyme patient. So they moved to San Diego in hopes of not being reinfected. That should tell you, give you a little pulse. Spoke to a doctor in Michigan last year who said I was not even known as a Lyme doctor, and I had a line of people out the door. I think what happens is, the states don't want to talk about it. The National Park Service has some explaining to do as well in regards to their protocol for Lyme going back to the mid-90s. A couple of great books out there about that. The last thing I'm going to mention here is that there are 2 books written about this issue. One is called Lab 257, and one is called Bitten. Bitten is the more recent book that came out a couple of years ago. I'm not saying this book is perfect. I'm not saying even that there aren't questionable items in the book that need more research. But if 10% of what is in that book is true about the origins of Lyme disease in America, it is terrifying. Now, knowing what I know about the American government, it would not surprise me at all if all of it was true. But even still, 10% of what's in that book about the origins of Lyme, if 10% is true, it's terrifying. Lab 257 was the book written, I think it was written back in the 80s. It's also equally horrifying about the origins of Lyme on Plum Island, New York, which was a bioweapons research lab the government veiled under an ag lab. Long story, very interesting to read whether or not you have Lyme disease or not. Anyway, chronic illness is something that is just now a part of my life, but I want to end this on a positive note. I got up this morning at 5 o'clock in the morning. I did about 21 miles on my bike, hard miles. Riding by myself, there was high wind. It was actually warm this morning, which is odd because I'm at 7,000 feet, so it was pretty warm. But I rode hard for 21 miles. I've done about 100 miles this week so far. I do hikes, I paddle, I climb, I run. I do all the things that I was doing prior to getting Lyme disease. I'm able to hold my job. I can function. But I have to say this. Lyme is a shadow. It's my shadow. It is always with me, physically and mentally. It's always in the back of my mind. I have to talk to Lyme on a daily basis, and I have to find truce on a daily basis with it. It's always in the back of my head. I don't know if I'll ever be able to be the person I was before, quite to that degree, but here's the twist. I am a much better person now than I was before. I'm much more well-rounded, and I think Lyme, in some weird way, was the best thing that ever happened to me because it made me realize and make decisions about my life that I would have never made if I had not acquired the disease. So it's one of those weird things. It's the twist that you don't see coming where Lyme forces you to look in the mirror and say, who am I and what is my life actually about? What is important and how am I going to focus on the things that are going to make me a better human being? So I try to spend as much time as I can with fellow Lyme patients around the world. I spend a lot of time on the phone, a lot of time on emailing, a lot of time on email, trying to help people, offering suggestions. But again, I am not a medical professional. My path through Lyme had every twist and turn you could imagine. I made a lot of mistakes. I did protocols that I would never do again. Find a good doctor and adhere to what they say. Be diligent, be vigilant, stick to the program, and control the things that you can control by yourself, like your diet, your sleep. Those are things that you can do immediately and without having any kind of protocol. Then find your good doctor, work with them. It's a marathon, not a sprint. But again, stay positive. I hope this was helpful. If you have any questions, just write them below. I know this was kind of a meandering mess, but it is a very complicated story. I'm glad that I'm moving in the right direction. And for those of you here looking for photography stuff, yeah. I'll get back to it. But I had to get this done.